Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are reading chapter 5 of Mara, Daughter of the Nile. This chapter is dedicated to my daughters and my niece and their entire 6th, 7th, and 8th grade class at their school. The chapter today is titled Dangerous Bargain. Mara found Sheftu's manor next morning just as gay, just as impersonal, and so much more convincing than her own that she was out of sorts before an hour had passed. There was no undoing him at irony, that was clear. She would have to find some other means of punishing him. Resentfully, she allowed herself to be entertained by his tales of the ancient monuments they passed, which she had to admit were more interesting than anything she had found in Zasha's scrolls. Sheftu talked well, and he was in high spirits this morning, which spurred him to new flights in his storytelling. This was especially true when he related happenings of more recent years, fables of the present. They seemed to Mara, though he said that they were true. Such a one was the story of Queen Hatshepsut's expedition to God's land, the fabulous country of Punt, which was said to lie far, far south of Egypt across an inland sea. Mara had always thought that land a myth, and she told him so. Which you guys might hear some birds, and they're just joining in the fun. Hopefully they're not too loud. Such a voyage is impossible, she scoffed. There is no such place. You're too credulous. Not so. Would you like proof? Our captain sailed on that journey, and so did this very ship. Ho there, Nakonk! At his hail, the burly riverman crossed the deck to regard Sheftu warily. I pray you, Captain, give this maid proof that I'm no liar. She won't believe that the Queen's ship sailed to God's land. Hey, that's easy, grunted Nakonk. He turned to her then. We found that land right enough so far to the south that we all but turned back before we reached it. It lies on a strange sea, and dwarfish little black men live there. We set up the Queen's image in their village, and we brought back some of them. Apes, too, and greyhounds, and a live panther for the Queen, and myrrh and cinnamon, kesset wood, ivory, and green gold of emu. By Ammon, we had a cargo that time. Look, you little one, there in the scuppers. Do you see the dark spots? There stood the little intense trees we brought for the Queen's temple, watered and tended like babies, each with its ball of the earth. Trees? Echoed Mara incredulously. You brought back trees? Indeed, yes, Sheftu broke in. He exchanged an odd glance with the captain, who immediately grew wary again. The trees were the whole purpose of the voyage, blue-eyed one. Don't you remember the old tales of God's land? And the gardens filled with incense trees, terraced down to the sea? The Queen's aim was to build such a garden in Thebes for the god Ammon. She sent to the end of the world to find what she needed. Indeed, murmured Mara. She was suddenly less interested in the story than in the strange tension that seemed to have taken a hold of Nakonk. And did the Queen build her temple? She probed. Most magnificently, Sheftu told her. I'll show you when we reach Thebes. But I'm not going to Thebes. Not yet. Sheftu's black brows arched, but he said only, Then you must see it later. It's not difficult to find. The Queen has caused a highway to be built. At what cost I wouldn't dare guess. From the river straight across 2 miles of desert and valley to the temple's first terrace. A great stone avenue it is, lined on each side with sphinxes, and each sphinx has the head of her gracious majesty. By this time, Mara was convinced the whole conversation was aimed at Nakonk. He was staring fixedly, and she thought angrily into space. Is it not unusual, she ventured, that a queen's image appear on a public monument? It is most unusual, said Sheftu. But then these are unusual days in the land of Kempt. Do you know the writings of the ancient prophet Neferahu, Lotus Eye? He too speaks of unusual times. Sheftu lounged against the gunwale, quoting absently, "Behold, that which men dreaded now exists. Foes are in the east, and Asiatics descend into Egypt, and no protector hears. Speech is in men's heart as a fire. No utterance of the mouth is tolerated." Nakonk turned suddenly and made a stiff little bow to the young man. "A word with you, friend, when time permits in my cabin." He jerked out and walked away abruptly. Sheftu straightened, satisfaction on his dark face. "Excuse me," he murmured. "I must leave you now." And he too strode toward the cabin. Both men disappeared under its barrel-shaped roof. So, the captain had at last been goaded into that private conversation. For a moment, Mara leaned against the gunwale, drumming absently on it with her fingertips. Then she strolled idly down the deck, yawning and blinking as if overcome by drowsiness, stopping now and then to watch the oarsmen or stare up at the taut curve of the sail. When she reached the bales of wool stacked behind the cabin, she paused. Then, with the ease of long practice, melted into the shadows so casually that not a person on deck could have said where she vanished. Stooping low, she moved swiftly between the bales and crouched behind the cabin's rear wall. Within, she could hear the vague murmur of voices. She pressed her ear to the boards. "Henchmen of the king?" came Nakoff's gruff mutter. "One of those fools, or heroes, we spoke of on the voyage down? I suspected it then. I'm sure of it now." "I meant you to suspect," returned Sheftu with a low laugh. "Then I'm right?" "Quite right. I'm the leader of the movement and a close friend of His Most Princely Majesty, though no one knows but his followers. On the surface, I live the life I was born to, that of an arrogant and wealthy lord devoted to the king." So I'm going to stop here. And Nakonk is asking Shentu, "Are you a henchman of the king?" And Sheftu said, "Yeah, I was kind of trying to give you that point. And you are right. He's not just the henchman, he's a leader of the movement. And so he believes that Thutmose should be the king. And he's trying to get Thutmose, he's trying to get the pharaoh, Thutmose's big sister, out of there. And he's trying to lead a movement to get Thutmose to become the new pharaoh." So it says, "On the surface, I live the life I was born to, that of an arrogant and wealthy lord devoted to the queen." "Lord Sheftu," thought Mara, tingling with astonishment. Like an echo came Nakonk's whispered exclamation. "Lord Sheftu? Then you must be the son of Lord Menkau, friend of the pharaoh and the richest man in Egypt. The great Menkau who died only last flood time and was entombed in the royal valley itself." "Right again. I am in the full confidence of the queen. It's most convenient. Even more convenient is the stream of gold and silver that pours into my hands from the palace treasury. Her Majesty distributes bribes as lavishly as she does everything else. But my share of them flows in a strange direction." "To Thutmose?" "Precisely." Again, the low laugh. "Hatshepsut's gold buys her own downfall." So what he's saying there is Hatshepsut is giving Thutmose and him money, and they're using that money to try to usurp her authority from the seat that she sits. So they're trying to get her out of being the pharaoh with her own money. Behind the cabin wall, Maro had to choke down her delight. Oh, lucky chance that had drawn her here to listen. This information would be worth a fabulous amount to that new master of hers. How his granite face would come alive when she mentioned the name of Lord Sheftu. When she told him how the queen's gold was being used, she could almost see the thin smile that would curl those thinner lips. But suddenly she found herself picturing Sheftu's face instead, and the way the little golden river reflections danced across it, and how his arms had felt about her. Don't play the fool, she warned herself. Nobody matters. Nothing matters except freedom and gold. Think you this Sheftu would thank you for holding your tongue? Ha! He'd slice it off quick enough if he thought it would harm him. Look out for yourself and let him do likewise. She pressed closer to the wall. One of your allies, Nakonk said, urging. Surely you have need of a ship and a captain you could trust. I'd pledge my life. We must all do that. Our lives, our fortunes, our brains, they're all forfeit if ever we hold back for safety's sake. There's no safety anywhere in the Black Land while Hatshepsut rules it. She's like a dagger pointed at Egypt's heart. We must knock it away, whatever the cost, in lives and gold. I understand. I agree. I wish to be one of you. You are one of us, Captain, returned Sheftu smoothly. Had I not been sure of you, you would never have reached Menfi. I see, muttered the other. On the other side of the wall, Mara shivered a little, remembering the coldness of Sheftu's eyes yesterday. The man was a fanatic, and therefore dangerous as a cobra. She felt sympathy for Nakonk. So be it, Nakonk was saying gruffly, and the devourer take me if I ever fail you. What are my orders? There may be some very soon. For the present, I would know your plans for the next few weeks. Name me the voyages you will make. There was an odd little silence. Mara frowned and leaned closer. Then Nakonk's voice came again. It was louder, but it sounded a little strained. Once in Thebes, I'll lay over for 5 days while a new cargo is making ready. Then I must deliver the shipment back to Heliopolis, taking on timber there, which I will bring back to Abydos for the reconstruction of the... A tiny sound close behind Mara made her whirl around. In an instant, she was on her feet, shrinking back against the cabin wall. Not 3 feet from her, lounging casually against a bale, stood Lord Sheftu. He smiled, and a little chill ran up between her shoulder blades. Are you not tired of straining your ears? He inquired mildly. Join us inside. You will be able to hear much better. And to die much faster, thought Mara. Without answering, she leaped for the open space between 2 bales. But quick as she was, he was quicker. Without seeming to disturb his lazy pose, his hand shot out, and fingers like iron bands closed over her wrist. I repeat, join us inside. We crave your company. Indeed, Mara spoke through her teeth, trying in vain to twist away from him. I'll wager you at that. Let me go. You'd gain naught by that. We're on a ship, you know. Just where could you run to? Over the side. He gave a short laugh. Have you forgotten the crocodiles? Better them than you. Sheftu's eyebrows rose in mock dismay. Is my company so repellent? I thought you were enjoying my conversation. Otherwise, I'd not have let you overhear so much. Let me? You knew I was listening? Of course. You arrived here at about the moment our good captain was telling me his suspicions. Now I think of it, he's still chatting away to empty air in there. Suppose we can go tell him to stop now. Sheftu grinned and started out through the bales, Mara's wrist still firm in his grasp. There was nothing to do but follow, as she found after a final struggle. She looked down in despair and real wonder at the hand which held hers. It was lean and shapely, the hand of an aristocrat, yet it had the sinews of a porter's. Ah, unlucky that day that I laid eyes on this Sheftu, she mourned. May misfortune take the keft that led me to the ship of all the ship in Memphis harbor. They were free of the stacked bales now, walking the few paces of open deck. Mara gazed hungrily at the sunlight and the green river, the blue, blue sky. Never had they seemed so beautiful. She thought of the Pharaoh's golden palace, the freedom and luxury which might soon have been hers, the unread scrolls in Zasha's room of books, and the dim, sweet memory of that other room. Soon even memories would be lost to her. He is not really cruel, she thought. He will do it quickly. They stepped inside the cabin door, and the sun was dimmed. There in the shadows sat Nakonk, still muttering obediently of cargoes and voyages. He leapt to his feet as they entered. So, the eavesdropper, he growled. Nay, our guest. How can you be so inhospitable, Captain? Give the maid a stool. She seems pale. Grimly, Nakonk obeyed, and Mara sat down on the leather cushion, swallowing hard. She had never experienced this sort of ruthlessness, the sort that came sheathed in exquisite charm. So what she's saying there is that she's never experienced someone being so harsh or mean, but it covered over like he's being sweet or kind to her. And she felt like that was even more mean than just being mean itself. Sheftu settled one hip comfortably on the plank table and began to swing his leg. This is better, he approved. I dislike an atmosphere of deceit. It is far better to be frank with one another. Don't you agree, Captain? Yes, my lord, said Nakonk uncertainly. Sheftu spun around to him. Never call me lord. I am a scribe, Captain. My life might hang on your remembering that, and yours certainly does. Do you understand? The sheath had slipped for a moment. Mara gripped the sides of her stool, and moisture broke out on her forehead. She wished heartily he would kill her and be done with it. I understand, muttered Nakonk. Good. As I was about to say, we will have no secrets among the three of us. You both know who I am and what master I serve. Sheftu turned again to Mara, smiling. And I know, as perhaps you do not, Captain, who this blue-eyed one is and what master she serves. The words were almost casual, but had the ship suddenly stood on end, Mara could not have been more shocked. She was on her feet without knowing she had moved. Master? I have no master. You're talking nonsense. What a liar you are, he said. Half frantic, Mara went over in her mind every detail of her sudden purchase, the walk through the streets with her new master, the conversation behind carefully secured doors. No one could possibly have overheard or guessed without overhearing. Was this Sheftu a sorcerer? You're bluffing, she spat at him. You know naught of me before the day I boarded this ship. How could you? Why, it took no particular effort. The knowledge was fairly thrust upon me. I know, I assure you. Prove it. His smile hardened. My dear Mara, I don't have to prove it. He spoke the truth. She was trapped, and he'd never dare let her leave the ship alive. Moreover, she was convinced he did know everything. Somewhere, somehow, he had found her out. Her master's cold warning sounded again in her ears. If anyone should find out, you will die at once. So be it, she said bitterly, but you need not soil your lordly hands with my death. Others will save you the trouble. Nay, I do not hire cutthroats. It is not my way. Though I have no stomach for this day's task, believe me. What a pity to close forever those lotus blue eyes. Sit thee down, maid. Thy face is as white as thy dress. She sank down again, barely able to mutter a sarcastic retort. I thank you for your concern. It comes a little late. Nay, perhaps not. He clasped his hands comfortably about his knee. You find yourself in an unenviable situation, blue-eyed one. But I must point out that you were warned. I spoke truth yesterday when I said I'd not decided what I wanted of you. Now I have no choice. I must silence you or use you. I prefer the latter. But since I don't trust you as far as tomorrow, I must have some weapon to hold over your pretty head. Come now, you'd best do as I say. There's an ugly punishment for a runaway. Runaway? Thought Mara despairingly. If that were all, was that all he knew? Nakonk was speaking, his voice more gentle than usual. So that's what she is? I wondered a little at her rags and that gold chain. No doubt she stole it from her master. Why didn't I guess? Why? Shaftu laughed shortly. Look at her, Captain. There's the reason. Has she anything of the slave about her save those rags? If I'd not actually seen her dragged home to a beating by the stupid oaf who owns her. Look you, Mara, I'll not send you back to him on one condition. What condition? She whispered. Her mind was racing. If he thought her merely a runaway, but what of that conversation she had overheard? Would he dare release her with such information? He seemed to be ignoring it altogether. What in Ammon's name could he have in mind? Why didn't he speak? What condition? She repeated. That you serve me instead of Zasha. Sheftu got up and began to pace the tiny room. But not as a slave, Mara, as an ally. I need someone like you who is unknown, beyond suspicion, and clever. It is a dangerous task, but you have no choice, as I think I've made clear. Mara listened in silence, hardly able to believe what he was saying. For the second time in 1 week, she was being threatened with her life, being maneuvered with almost identical phrases into the position of spy and intriguer, and by two who were deadly enemies fighting in opposing camps for opposing causes. It was incredible, but it was true, and suddenly it struck Mara that it was also hilarious. She stood up so abruptly that the folding stool she had been sitting on overturned and collapsed. She hastened to right it, struggling meanwhile to gain control of herself. She must not laugh. She must not. But she was hard put to it to hide her elation. The sudden return of all her old, brash confidence. Sheftu knew nothing that could hurt her, whereas she had him as neatly checkmate as if this were a giant game of draughts. True, he had found out she was a slave. What matter? He did not know her master, and before he found out, long before that, he would be in chains. He may be clever, she thought. Well, so am I. He may be a great lord and a ruthless one, but he has yet to find out how ruthless a gutter snipe can be. She faced him submissively. I agree to the condition. You're right. I have no choice. I'm glad you see that. Our prince needs your courage and your wits. Come, put them to work with mine on this matter. I want you to carry a message to His Highness. To do that, you must be introduced somehow into the palace. And I prefer that you stay there if we can possibly arrange it. There will be other messages. Nakonk, who had remained in the background, an uneasy spectator to the little drama, stirred finally. Have you thought of the Canaanite princess whose ships are now at Abydos? Could not this little one be disguised? As a barbarian? Sheftu laughed and gestured toward Mara. This maiden? Every line of her spells Egypt. No, Captain. I thought of it and discarded the idea. It would be perfect, but... Why as a barbarian? Murmured Mara demurely. I speak Babylonian. Will not the princess need an interpreter? An interpreter? Sheftu halted his pacing. Nakonk objected. They will have arranged for that already. One is to go aboard at Abydos. but we will change their arrangements. This one is far better for us, and I believe it can be done. Blue-eyed one, already you are invaluable, but we need to find you clothing, some woman to dress your hair. Mara summoned all her audacity. Leave that to me. Look you, there is a sandal maker in Abydos, an old man I once befriended. I was bound for his house because I knew he would hide me. Perhaps give me a few deben to buy bread and lodging in Thebes. He hates Zasha. I think he would arrange this other too, perhaps for a price. For a price. Sheftu's smile twisted a little. Men will do anything for a price. Tell me more of this one. Does he know how to keep his tongue in leash? Would I have been willing to trust him myself if he did not? He has no family, few friends. He's a crusty sort. But he always liked me, and he bears a grudge against Zasha, who cheated him once in trading. Zasha travels to Abydos to buy his sandals? Mara came alert sharply. So Sheftu was not swallowing all this without tasting, as she had thought he was. She had best beware that lazy smile. Zasha once lived in Abydos, she answered. His wife is the daughter of a priest there. Then you too lived in the sacred city? In what street was Zasha's villa located? The same that runs past the temple of Osiris, said Mara, knowing there must be such a temple, and praying that the street which passed it might also cross the district of finer homes. Evidently it did, for Sheftu made no comment beyond asking her the old man's name. She invented one hastily, and he nodded as if satisfied, resuming his perch on the table. So be it. Buy the garments of him, and buy him too. You must not be in his debt there. His hand went into his girdle and came out again holding a heavy ring fashioned of electrum, a costly mixture of gold and silver. It was encrusted with tiny garnets and lapis lazuli in a design of lotus flowers. Mara drew a long breath as she took it. Zasha, the jewel trader, had never handled anything like this. Give him that, said Sheftu, for his help and his silence, but tell him nothing save that you fled from Zasha. I understand. Mara slipped the ring into her own sash, where it nestled against the queen's tiny scarab. Again she struggled with inward mirth. The next problem is installing you as an interpreter, Sheftu went on. That is more difficult. I dare not be seen. Who captains the princess's ship? Nakonk, is he Egyptian? One Sank Wen, a thick-witted fellow, but can he be bought? Doubtless, Nakonk rubbed his chin. But would he talk later? He's a garrulous sort, especially in his cups. Mara was growing impatient, anxious to have done with it. Once the details were settled, she would be far safer from Sheftu's probing mind. As to Shank Wen, no problem existed, although she dare not tell them so. Come, use your head, she thought. You must manage this part too. Even in his cup, she said, would a man talk of his own misdeeds? Perhaps a soft glance and a glib tongue would be of more use here than bribery. If a man is bribed and feels guilty later, he can blame those who bribed him. But if he is led to substitute one interpreter for another because blandishments sound sweet to his ears, whom can he blame later but himself? He would scarce boast of his own foolishness, would he? So what she's saying there is maybe she can talk to him and make him want to give her the space of being the interpreter. And he would never admit to that afterwards because it would be his mistake and not somebody else's. And all men are fools, added Sheftu blandly. Not you, my friend, thought Mara. Aloud she said, With a shrug, "This one might be. The captain says he's thick-witted." Growled Nakonk uneasily, "but the idea seems chancy." "Perhaps not." Sheftu was studying Mara with amusement. "This maid understands the arts of blandishment, Captain. I witnessed a little encounter of hers with a baker's boy back in Menfi that gave me real pleasure. I believe we can risk it. If it fails, there will still be time to try something else. We'll not leave Abydos until she gives the signal." "Then all's settled?" inquired Mara. Except for the message you are to give the king. Tell him I have..." Sheftu hesitated and changed the sentence. "Tell him the Warhawk is coming." "The Warhawk is coming? But what does it mean?" Sheftu smiled. "It is the king I wish to enlighten, blue-eyed one, not you." He got up from the table. "We'll arrange our signals tomorrow, but now we must separate or the crew will be marveling at all this tongue-wagging." He started for the door, but paused before Mara, still smiling faintly. "Lest you be wondering, it will not be feasible to slip away from me in Abydos, to sell my ring, or to do anything at all save what we have planned. Make no mistake about that. If my prince is endangered, I care not what color eyes I close forever." He moved past her and out of the cabin. Shaken a little in spite of herself, Mara rose to follow, but Nakonk stopped her with a touch on her arm. She turned to find him gazing down at her with a troubled frown. "He's a hard master, that one," he whispered, jerking his head toward Sheftu's retreating figure. "I sweated for you when he sat there swinging his leg and juggling your life about in his two hands. But you should not have eavesdropped." "I'm not afraid of him. He'll do me no harm as long as I am useful to him. But, Captain, how he must hate the queen and love his prince." But I think he loves Egypt even more. To my notion, that's what makes him throw away his gold and his life like this and use men as if they were tools. That's why he holds a bludgeon over the head of even a friendless maid like you, little one, and turns your wits to his own purpose and takes chances that could end in murder." Nakonk shook his head. He's reckless and perhaps mad, but Ammon help me, I think I'd follow him to the river of the dead and back." "He may demand it," said Mara slowly. She left the cabin, drank in the sun-drenched air and the fresh, clean smell of water and canvas sails and wind, miraculously restored to her again, then sought the privacy of her pile of hides. All is changed now, she reflected, yet all is still the same. Tomorrow, when they docked at Abydos, she would proceed with her former plans as if nothing had happened today. But what a difference there was! She now had knowledge that would buy her freedom from her new master in an instant, and perhaps shower her with gold as well. In fact, she had wealth already in the shape of that jewel-encrusted ring, which of course would never leave her sash. All her dreams were beginning to come true. As for revenge, Osiris, she had that tenfold, 100-fold. Then why, she thought, am I not happier? She moved restlessly on the soft skins, puzzling over the queer, flat taste of her triumph. Finally, she raised herself on one elbow and frowned out against the green and sparkling river, which was struck with fire where the sun's rays touched it. Lord Sheftu, a great nobleman, he was as far from the likes of her as the very sun up yonder. He must have been amusing himself in truth these 7 days, seeking her company, flaunting his charming manners, even holding her in his arms a moment. But it was clear what he thought of her. Gutter snipe. At that moment, Sheftu walked along the edge of the deck and paused, leaning on the rail. She could not see his expression, for his profile was black against the dazzling sky. But there was weariness in his pose, and he looked lonely, human, far different from the deadly menace who had lounged against that bale. Perhaps it was true. that he had no stomach for this day's work. Mara turned away angrily, not wanting to look at him, not wanting to think of the fact that the price of her freedom was his destruction. That was chapter 5 of Mara, Daughter of the Nile. See you soon.